Hello, everyone. This is Independent Conservative. I am Brian Bowen, and thank you all for joining once again. A few days ago, I did a video on Dr. Thomas Sowell's well-known economist. I did a video on his take on reparations for slavery, and there was some positive feedback for that, and I'm really grateful for that. So I was led to do another video that's closely in line with the reparations for slavery, but a little bit different. What I want to do here, I want to read an essay written by Thomas Sowell from the same book that was written in 2002. And this essay is in reference to racism in and of itself. And what Thomas Sowell is arguing in this particular essay, all right, is the idea of corporations dishing out tons of money to particular groups and particular organizations simply by them using the word racism. For example, Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. Jesse Jackson screams racism. Corporations dish out tons of money simply because he uses the word racism. Okay, never mind history, never mind facts, never mind any of this. You holler racism, it must be racism. We're going to give you tons of money. Man, I wish that could work for me. Maybe I should start doing that. Holler racism and get money from these corporations. All right. Forget about any facts of history, anything. Long as it's racism is cool, okay? So Thomas Sowell is going to argue against that in this essay that he wrote back in 2002. Let me mention something else before I begin to elaborate on this particular essay, is that because it's written in 2002, names that he mentioned will obviously be no longer in place right now because this is written in 2002, okay? But you're going to notice a similar thread of information. You're going to say, wait a minute, I hear that today. Well, of course we hear it today because guess what? This has been going on forever in this country. It's just that a lot of people just don't know because they don't know history. So let's get right into this article by Dr. Thomas Sowell, taken from his book, Controversial Essays. Okay, and yeah, it's controversial, right? And he starts off with these words. Perhaps Secretary of State Colin Powell's decision to pull the American delegation out of the so-called UN, United Nations, World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, will be just a footnote in history. But we can at least hope that it may be a turning point towards the future time when, quote, racism will no longer be a magic word used to gain money or political concessions. And then let me bring out real quickly here, the title of this particular essay is The Magic Word. And of course, what is that magic word? Racism. And as I said in the introduction, you just spit that word out now today. Oh my God, they are oppressed. White supremacy, racism. Let's give them $200,000. He goes on, within the United States, Jesse Jackson and others have repeatedly scared millions of dollars out of big corporations just by threatening to use the magic word racism. Even the police have sometimes turned a blind eye to violations of the law, lest they be tarred with that magic word that would bring the whole liberal media crashing down on them. Isn't that interesting? 2002, he was saying these things. This was going on. We're in 2024 right now, right? See how long this nonsense has been going on? The liberal media have had the focus of the masses of people for several decades, and it is crazy. He goes on, but letting criminal activity go on an unimpeded and unpunished has hurt minority communities most of all. So by law enforcement ignoring things that need to be taken care of, like crime in the inner cities and so forth and in the ghettos, guess who gets hurt by that? Afro-Americans, right? Let's go on. Now, let me say something too here. Thomas Sowell is going to mention some things in this particular essay that's going to be a surprise to some of you guys that are listening to this video and a shock to some, and maybe even anger you. But before I go any further, controversial essays, okay? It will be controversial for some people who have a problem with the truth, who have a problem with elements of history that they're not used to hearing. Let's go on. Against this background, it was to be expected that some African and Arab nations would hope that invoking this magic word might scare some money out of the United States as reparations. He talked about this some time ago, did he not? For slavery, and get some kind of United Nations condemnation of Israel as a bonus. But this time, the magic didn't work. So clearly something that was going on during that time where that word racism didn't work. Singling out Israel to blame for the Middle East's problems was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, leading both the U.S. and Israel to withdraw their delegations from the conference in Durban. Arab caricatures of Jews with big noses and bloody fangs were hardly a way of being against racism. He goes on. The real world class chutzpah, however, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. For anyone that may be Jewish is watching this, please forgive me. However, the real world class chutzpah, however, was the demand of African and Arab nations for reparations of slavery. Now get this, now just listen to this. Just who do you suppose enslaved the millions of Africans who ended up in the Western Hemisphere? It was the Africans. And who enslaved the even greater number of millions of African slaves who ended up in the Islamic world? It was the Arabs. I didn't say it. Dr. Thomas Sowell said it. But not only did Dr. Thomas Sowell say these things, but I've read this up on other historians and others who have studied history in this era, and they have said the same thing. But you will not hear that mentioned, right? You won't hear that mentioned in the mainstream news. Let's go on. During the era of African slavery, Thomas Sowell says, Europeans died like flies in tropical Africa, where diseases flourished for which they had no biological immunity and for which medical science had yet to devise a cure. Capturing people to sell into slavery was the work of Africans in West Africa and of Arabs and Africans in East Africa. Thomas Sowell goes on. Europeans came in their ships, bought slaves from the Africans, and then left the scene quickly before they fell sick from African diseases. Even so, many white crewmen on the ships bringing slaves from Africa to the Western Hemisphere died on the way. The notion that it was white people who introduced slavery to Africa, and I think I mentioned that a little bit in the last essay that I read several days ago in reference to this same thing in terms of reparations for slavery. The notion that white people introduced slavery to Africa is false. But Thomas Sowell goes to say, the notion that it was white people who introduced slavery to Africa or who captured most of the slaves themselves may fit the mindset of those who thought that roots was history, but this myth would not stand up to facts, logic, or economics. And let me say something about the whole situation with Roots. I believe the movie, the series Roots. I believe Thomas Sowell said this same thing too in one of his other books that I read. He doesn't mention it here, I believe, in these essays, but he elaborates a little bit more on the series Roots and the book Roots. The author of that book, Alex Haley, was actually, from what I understand, either sued or criticized for making up a lot of the concepts in his book. That book was he plagiarized some other author or something along that line. But some of the so-called historical concepts were actually myths. So Alex Haley was in an interview. One of the interview asked Alex Haley, "Why did you make this up?" And Alex Haley said, "I wanted to give my people a myth to live by." This is supposedly what Alex Haley said. Clearly, I'm pretty sure he said that, because I haven't heard of anyone refuting it since. So my question inevitably is this: why would you make up a myth for your people to live by? Why don't you just create true historical facts about Africa that would benefit black people? Focus on the positive things. If you really are, the way I see it, if you was really sincere about elevating black progresses in America and elevating black people as a whole in America, rather than make up something, why didn't he just study the African history apart from what he felt may have been edited out or censored out by Europeans? Do some real research on true African history in terms of Egypt, other areas of Africa and so forth, and elevate those positive concepts of African people and use that as a factual basis by which to cause black people in America to feel more like they're somebody, to be confident in themselves rather than make up a myth for them to live by. Really? Are you serious? So the whole thing, so I wanted to add that to this particular paragraph that Thomas Sowell says in this particular essay. He doesn't elaborate on it here, but I wanted to elaborate on it here. He talks about that roots. He says, I'm gonna read that again. The notion that it was white people who introduced slavery to Africa or who captured most of the slaves themselves may fit the mindset of those who thought that roots was history, but this myth would not stand up to facts, logic, or economics. And let me say this before I move any further. We can't, as a whole, whether we white, black, or whatever, look to a movie as the basis for accurate historical facts. A movie may have some accuracy in it, but it is not the standard by which we can judge all things as accurate. It's a movie. It's a TV show. So they're going to do things to dramatize the effects so that more people will watch it. But let's be realistic. Most people watch movies. Most people listen to music. Most people watch these series because they want to be entertained. They don't watch these movies and they don't listen to this music to be educated. You can put that in there, but that's not generally the reason why they watch movies. They want to be entertained. So the bottom line of any movie or series or song is to entertain. Okay? But if you allow yourself to be limited to just what a movie says about history, you're going to be limited about history. And unfortunately, as Thomas Sowell says in this portion of the article, a lot of people depended on the series Roots as the accurate portrayal of whites in their relationship to blacks and slavery. That's wrong. It's inaccurate. It doesn't line up with facts and logic. Let's go on. Since it was the Africans and the Arabs who actually caught and sold slaves, that's historical fact, do the African and Arab nations plan to send reparations over here to the descendants of enslaved Africans living in the Western Hemisphere? Good question. Of course not. They want the United States to lay some of those American dollars on them. We have fallen for so many other sucker plays in the past. Why not try this one on us? Thomas Sowell goes on to say, when slavery is mentioned, and I totally agree with this one, when slavery is mentioned, too many people automatically think of whites enslaving blacks. And I mentioned this, I believe I mentioned this actually in one of my Sunday school sessions. I used to teach Sunday school at my church, and we were dealing with the Egyptians enslaving the Hebrews in ancient times. And I mentioned this idea of slavery. When we hear the word slavery, we automatically think of whites enslaving blacks because that's the only narrative that's been spun to us. Forgetting about the fact that slavery has been all around us, been in existence for thousands of years. Let's go on. That is not even 1/10 of the story of slavery, Thomas Sowell says, which existed on every inhabited continent. And he mentioned that in the last article, essay that I read. The very word slave derives from the word the very word slave derives from the word for some white people who were enslaved on a mass scale. The Slavs, for more centuries than blacks were enslaved in the Western Hemisphere. That is a shocking historical fact that is not mentioned in our textbooks, from what I understand, and that is not mentioned in the mainstream media. Now, why is that? It's a fact. Why wouldn't they mention it? Keep the division going. You got to keep that division going. You can't mention that because white people are the ones that created slavery, right? White people are the ones that initiated all of this. Let's hear what Thomas Sowell has to say further on this issue. Moreover, slavery existed in the Western Hemisphere before the first black or white person ever set foot on these shores. Let me read that again. Moreover, slavery existed in the Western Hemisphere before the first black or white person ever set foot on these shores. The indigenous peoples of this hemisphere enslaved one another, just as Asians enslaved Asians, Europeans enslaved Europeans, and Africans enslaved Africans. Attempts to limit the discussion of slavery to slavery in the United States or in Western civilization makes sense only as a strategy to get money or political concessions. I absolutely agree. It works when you can get people to dish out that money because they feel like they're giving money to a just cause. But see, me right now, I would not dare give any organization or group, rather, any money because you holler slavery. I don't like to toot my own horn, but I'm kind of an informed person now. So don't even throw that towards my way because you're wrong. You're off. It's not accurate historical facts. Let's go on. Let's see what else he has to say in summarizing this. Western civilization was the first civilization to regard slavery as, watch this now. I'm going to read this again here because this right here was a shocker to me when I first read it. In his other books, he elaborates on it even further, okay? In his one book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals or White Rednecks, something like that along the line. Excellent book written in 2005. He elaborates even further on this idea, right? Western civilization was the first civilization to regard slavery as morally wrong, and it is the civilization with the most sense of guilt about it. In other words, what people don't know is that it was the West, Great Britain first, Thomas Sowell mentions in his other book, Great Britain first, and then America that recognized that slavery was morally wrong. They were the ones that initiated outlawing slavery, not Africa, not Middle East, none of these other countries before, now, or ever have ever done it. Right now in these other countries, they still have slaves. Regardless of how you may want to justify it was an economic thing, no, it's an economic thing for the people that's slaving them, yeah. But even if it's an economic thing for the overall economy of that particular nation, it's still morally wrong to take someone's rights of freedoms from them like that. But yet, America is the one that has the greatest, as Thomas Sowell says here, has the greatest sense of guilt about it. Now, why? Because the mainstream media and the liberal establishment have made them to feel that way. But see, with knowledge comes power. With knowledge comes power. Let's read on. To this very moment, slavery continues in parts of Africa and the Islamic world. Now, remember, this was written back in 2002. And he was saying slavery at this very moment continued in Africa, parts of Africa and the Islamic world. I'm pretty sure it is today because I read recently from one particular article and book that it still continues. And we have people from America, white people, trying to go over there to try to change that, trying to save some of these slaves that are people that are being enslaved. You hear them getting any recognition? Nope. Because of white people, America, you just so evil, you just so bad. Let's go on. Very little noise is made about it by those who denounce the slavery of the past in the West. Absolutely. Because there is no money to be made denouncing it and no political advantages to be gained. Absolutely. It's all about the money. If we start talking about these other areas of slavery, you know, the Islamic world and so forth, enslaving people in African countries, enslaving people at the present time, they're not going to get any donations from anyone. Corporations are not going to give them any money. It's all about the money. Forget about the truth. We just want the money. Money is our God. Forget about facts and data. Money is our God. That's fine, though. I'd rather be on the side of truth. Tom Sowell goes on, if the American delegation walked out of the UN conference against racism, if the American delegation walking out of the UN conference against racism represented a belated waking up to the scams being played, that could be a very healthy sign for the future. not only on the international scene, but within the United States as well. There you go. There's your words, or rather, there's Thomas Sowell's words on the whole idea of the magic word racism and how that word then and now is used to get money. All you have to do is say, this is racist, and you get money. All you have to do is say, white supremacy, and you'll get money. All you have to do is say, I'm being discriminated against by white people, and you'll get money. It's just a money thing. So what was going on then is going on now. But I believe, as Thomas Sowell said in his essay there, that it's best to stick to facts, okay? Because even though you might not get all the money and accolades and so forth, it's best to stick to the facts. And let me say this and ending this video. Everybody doesn't agree with Thomas Sowell. And let me be honest with you. I don't agree with every single thing he says. There was some particular comment he made about something. I can't remember what it was, and I didn't really agree with it necessarily, okay? So he's not perfect like anyone else is not perfect. But someone may argue, well, Thomas Sowell is like the rest of these other liberals and so forth. He just wants to write books to get money. Let me tell you this. What I know about Thomas Sowell. In fact, I read a book on him. I read a biography on him written by a young man. And by the way, I want you guys to check this book out. Let me name what this book actually is. Yeah, the name of the book is, some of you might know it, Maverick, a biography of Thomas Sowell written by Jason L. Riley. Excellent biography written about Thomas Sowell. The biography is not so much a focus on the life of Thomas Sowell. He does mention bits and pieces of that, but it's more or less a focus on his works in economics, sociology, and other things, okay? But my point in mentioning that is to mention this. In that particular book written by Jason Riley on Thomas Sowell, he mentions the fact that Thomas Sowell's essays and books were controversial because they went against the mainstream liberal norm, which was based on making money and creating a narrative that would brainwash the masses of people into accepting that one narrative. Thomas Sowell was not just in this writing books just to get money. Of course he wanted to get paid for it. Who would write a book and then try to get it published not to get paid? What sense does that make? That's stupid. Of course he wanted to get paid and wants to now when he writes a book. What people talking about? But his focus was not merely about money. Why? Because if it was merely about money, he would have given in to the leftist narrative. He didn't. He didn't then and he doesn't now. So he didn't get the recognition then as more people are hearing about him now, but he was barely known back then because his essays and his books went against the liberal narrative that was being spun for the most part. It went against that, okay? So he's not in it just for the money. He's in it for the truth. He wants to give truth. He wants to give the other side of the story. Okay, not just one side spun by the mainstream liberals. But yeah, that's what I wanted to bring out there. Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting and fact-based essay that he wrote way back in 2002. And that has been going on even before 2002. The whole idea of of institutions and groups hollering racism, using the magic word, Thomas Sowell calls it, racism, and getting money for it. But they're not going to go beyond that. They're not going to start mentioning how all these, he already said it. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. Yeah, he already said it. And so that's all there is to that, But yeah. That's the whole thing. This whole magic word, so-called magic word racism is a bunch of nonsense. And I think it needs to stop, just like Thomas Sowell feels then and now that it needs to stop. But what do you guys think? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. God bless you all. See you again.